It was supposed to be a routine summit, another roundtable in Ghana bringing together select West African and Central African leaders to discuss regional cooperation, security, and the continent's future. The invitations were sent quietly, the location secured discreetly, and the press kept largely unaware. Among those expected were President Umaro Sissoco Embalo of Guinea-Bissau, President Paul Kagame of Rwanda, and a handful of observers from ECOWAS. The goal: to privately discuss the rapidly shifting alliances in the Sahel and rising calls for African sovereignty. But what none of them expected, not even the Ghanaian hosts, was the arrival of Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the young, charismatic, and polarizing leader of Burkina Faso. When Traoré's plane touched down at Kotoka International Airport, eyebrows were raised. By the time his convoy rolled into the presidential residence in Accra, the air was already thick with tension. Why was he here? Who invited him? And more importantly, what was he planning to say? Last year, 2024, was not just another page in African political history. It was the turning point. The Sahel Alliance, a tripartite pact between Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, had stunned the continent by rejecting French influence and forging their own path. Under Traoré's watch, Burkina Faso had kicked out French troops, nationalized gold resources, and launched a self-reliance campaign that won hearts across Africa. But to the old political elite, particularly leaders still closely tied to Western economic systems, Traoré was a threat, a symbol of disruption. So when he strode into the quiet meeting room in Accra, dressed not in a Western suit, but in his signature military fatigues with a calm confidence, the room fell silent. President Embalo looked up from his notes. Kagame narrowed his eyes slightly, not out of hostility, but surprise. A hush swept over the Ghanaian aides. The unspoken question floated in the air. How did he get invited? He wasn't on the official guest list, yet there he was. Traoré didn't speak immediately. He took his seat, nodded respectfully to each head of state, and waited for the discussions to resume. The moderator, visibly rattled, tried to regain control of the meeting. President Embalo, ever the outspoken figure, broke the ice. "Captain Traoré, I must admit we weren't expecting you." Traoré smiled slightly. "No one expects the winds of change, Excellency, but they come all the same." The tone was set. What followed was not a confrontation, but a reckoning. Traoré didn't lecture, didn't shout, and didn't condemn. Instead, he asked questions, difficult, piercing questions that no one else had dared voice in a room of presidents. Why do we still depend on foreign armies to secure our lands? Why do we export raw materials and import poverty? Why do our people die trying to escape a continent that feeds the world? For nearly an hour, Traoré laid out a vision not of war, but of sovereignty, a Pan-African solidarity rooted in economic independence, cultural pride, and homegrown security. His words weren't revolutionary because they were new, but because he dared to speak them in the presence of power. Midway through this powerful moment, we want to take a moment to thank all our loyal subscribers, viewers, and members of the Chronicle Traoré family. Your unwavering support helps us tell stories that the mainstream media won't touch. If you believe in an Africa that speaks for itself, please like, share, comment, and consider becoming a Super Thanks supporter. Together, we are rewriting the narrative. President Kagame, a man known for his calculated silence, finally spoke. "Captain Traoré," he said, "your vision is compelling. But sovereignty must be managed carefully. It's not only about kicking out foreign powers, it's about building what replaces them. What does your alliance offer that ECOWAS cannot?" Traoré didn't flinch. "We offer African solutions. No orders from Paris, no scripts from Washington, just Africans solving African problems." The room again fell into a long pause. Embalo, perhaps feeling the pressure of the moment, pushed back. "But unity means dialogue, Captain. If every country begins breaking away, we risk chaos." Traoré leaned forward. "No. What brings chaos is pretending unity exists while our people are bled dry. Real unity begins with truth." Ghana's president, who had remained diplomatically quiet, finally interjected. "Perhaps Captain Traoré is here not to divide us, but to remind us of something we've forgotten. Courage." What many outside the room didn't know was that Traoré's presence wasn't entirely spontaneous. A small but growing number of African leaders had begun reaching out to the Sahel Alliance in private. They were watching Traoré, Goïta of Mali, and Tiani of Niger. They were impressed not just by their bold moves, but by their results. Burkina Faso, under sanctions and pressure, was still standing. More than that, it was inspiring. So this meeting in Ghana had a dual purpose: to test the waters of unity and to measure the temperature of change. And Traoré's arrival turned it into a storm. By the time the meeting ended, something unspoken had shifted. Kagame didn't openly endorse Traoré, but his final words hinted at admiration. "There's strength in knowing who you are, Captain. Rwanda didn't become Rwanda by imitation. Africa will need different kinds of leaders in the future." Embalo, too, had softened. "You are young, but you've made old men listen. That is rare." Traoré simply replied, "I'm not asking for permission. I'm asking for partnership. Africa doesn't need new masters. It needs new brothers." As he stood to leave, even those who had doubted his arrival found themselves quietly applauding, not because they agreed with everything he said, but because they could not deny the clarity, the courage, and the conviction he brought with him. Outside, Traoré's convoy rolled past curious Ghanaians who wondered why security was so tight. His visit remained unofficial, no public statement, no press photos. But word spread quickly through diplomatic circles. Traoré had made his presence known, and in doing so he had flipped a switch. After that meeting, reports trickled in that several ECOWAS leaders had quietly begun reviewing their foreign military agreements. Some ministers started visiting Ouagadougou, Niamey, and Bamako, not to criticize, but to learn. The ripples of that day in Accra traveled farther than any speech at the African Union. Months later, at another summit, one journalist dared ask Traoré what happened in Ghana. He smiled. "Sometimes all it takes is showing up." That answer said everything. In a continent long defined by who wasn't in the room, Traoré made history simply by being there, uninvited, unexpected, but undeniably necessary. And in the silence of that Ghanaian conference room, the old Africa looked in the mirror and saw the new one staring back.